A few years ago, in Novemberish of 2013, I was assigned to Fort Jackson. As a New Englander, I was pretty thrilled with the slower pace of life off post in South Carolina and met super friendly people practically everywhere we went. I missed my motorcycle back home, so I snagged one down there off Craigslist with the intent of shipping it back up north at the end of my temporary duty, and trading it in for something bigger and better that I could use for longer rides than my little guy back home, 1975 Honda 125 cubic centimeters. Anyway, I didn't know that I had to take some silly military motorcycle course, and this was back during the government shutdown when Jackson canceled all theirs, so my instructor demanded I find a post offering the course and take it on a military installation. Fortunately, I found a course at Fort Bragg, NC, which isn't too far, maybe like 2 or 3 hours. I only had a little sedan, but my buddy swapped cars with me for a few days and helped me load the bike on his Toyota Tundra, big truck, which wasn't too hard because it was just a little Honda 250. Not wanting to be late, I left for Bragg at some ungodly hour at like maybe 3 a.m. My GPS took me through back roads along open fields. The drive was peaceful and the roads were quiet. I was so excited because just a year before I had been searching for jobs back home with my crappy little economy car and no money. After joining the army, I was able to buy a nice car, get a little motorcycle, and go to parts of the country I had never been. If a year before that, if you told me that I would be in the Carolinas driving a pickup truck with my motorcycle around at 3 a.m., it would have been a huge shock. Anyway, I felt a great deal of pride and excitement and was a little high on life, corny as that is. It was easy in this big new truck to want to barrel through these long straight desolate roads, but I kept it slow and steady so as not to get pulled over. Eventually, I came up behind a speed up little American car. Maybe it was a Ford Fiesta-like thing? It was purple and had one person in the vehicle, just the driver. He was going very slowly, maybe 30 miles per hour, which was painful, but I stayed a safe distance behind him. Since I was in no hurry and had plenty of time, it was nice to drive slow for a while. Then the guy suddenly speeds up to like, maybe 70 or so, which seemed fast for these little roads. Foolishly, I thought that maybe this guy was an old pro and knew where the cops were. So I stayed with him, slowing down and speeding up as he did, but staying back far enough so my elevated truck lights didn't blind him. Everyone hates when trucks do that. Yes, I know maybe it seemed creepy I stuck with this guy at like 4 in the morning in the middle of nowhere, but I guess I didn't think about it. Besides, at the time I was just 26, a girl with longish dirty blonde hair who wore makeup and looked completely harmless. Who in their right mind would ever be afraid of me? Eventually the guy pulled off to the side, and that's when things got weird, and it was largely my fault for assuming everyone in the South was friendly and a heartbeat away from offering up some sweat tea. Maybe he had car trouble and I wanted to check on him to see if he was okay. I rolled down the window, leaned over to the passenger side so he could see how non-threatening I am, said something like, "Good morning, sir, are you okay? Wanted to check on you and not just leave you here if you're having car trouble. Have a phone if you need AAA. At this point it's very clear I'm just a youngish blondish female and probably harmless, and the weirdo goes, "I was doing just fine myself until I saw you was following me." Yeah, no, in that slow southern drawl. White guy, maybe 50s, heavy, unshaven but not bearded. Looked unkempt, and ugly, but in an odd hills have eyes sort of lumpy / asymmetrical way. Anyway, I felt badly that I may have given him a fright, so I tried to explain that I thought he knew where the cops were and that's why it seemed like I was following him, and I'm sorry. Then I asked him for directions to Bragg because my GPS wasn't working and I really wasn't sure where I was. At this point I didn't feel scared or anything because I'm in a huge truck and he's just off to the side in a little car. The guy basically started screaming at me, calling me a whore or something totally strange, and I was completely startled. So I said damn, and for some reason rolled up the window before shifting into drive when he screamed, "I ain't letting no goddamn horse swear in front of me. Bitch, I'ma put the fear of God in," couldn't hear the rest, The window was shutting right at the same time he said God. It was a huge WTF moment. Before I can put the truck in drive, his fat ass jumps out and tries to open my passenger door. As I'm shifting into drive, he is pounding on the window with this terrifying look on his face. It took me an extra second because I wasn't used to where the shift was on this car, and I paused for a sec, stupidly, to look at his face because I almost couldn't believe it. I'll never forget it. Beady eyes and seething hatred. Screaming and spitting on the shut window. It was like a frenzied rage. It was the craziest, angriest face I have ever seen. I floored it out of there so fast, completely freaked out. Sometimes I still dream about the guy. Let's not meet again, crazy inbred angry dude who loves God and hates swears. I recently found this sub, by recently, I mean less than an hour ago, and decided on posting a story that I usually repress, but it every so often comes flooding back to my memory. In the 8th grade, I had a stalker. One that I never saw, and one that never said anything in malice towards me. Back in the 8th grade, probably halfway through the school year, I received a phone call from an unknown caller. Usually, I would not answer for a number I didn't recognize, or sometimes I would do so in an accent, but I would always hang up after a second or two. Things changed, however, when the second I answered, I heard a man say my full name in a questioning tone. Like if he was asking for confirmation that this was me. Being just a kid, and thinking this was one of my parents' friends, or someone who I could talk to, I told him that that was me. Big mistake, but I didn't know at the time. That first phone call I don't remember much of, except that he hung up not long after I said that was me. Some time passed, maybe less than a week, when I got an unknown call again. I didn't answer, and then I kept getting spam calls. So I finally answered, and this guy was asking me about what shows I like to watch. I got the idea that maybe I shouldn't be talking to this guy, so I just hung up. Not much longer, another couple calls came in until I said to stop calling me, and he responded something to the effect of hanging up mid-conversation is rude. My dad heard me and asked who I was talking to, so I told him that I didn't know, and handed him the phone. My dad asked who this was, and to stop calling my number, in his angry dad tone. Then he got a confused face for a second, before getting really angry and shouting at them before they abruptly hung up. My dad later told me that this person knew my father's name, Carlos, and had told him, "Don't be so angry, Carles," before hanging up. Pretty soon, these calls would happen at least once a day, and I would almost always hand the phone to my dad for him to yell at the guy. We told all our friends and family to stop if they were prank calling me. We tried getting police involved, and we also contacted my middle school saying there was a guy being creepy with me. The guy never called during school hours, and he usually would call at first when I was home alone, but soon switched it up to calling around the time my father got home from work. This guy sounded young. For a long time we thought my uncles or their friends were playing pranks on us. He sounded maybe mid to late 20s, and sounded sort be Latino. Never had an angry tone, and never said anything malicious. But he was a stalker, and he knew the names of my parents, sister, my dogs, some cousins, and my grandparents. He never called when he had company over, and it was never after like 8 p.m. At one point I was sitting in my room, and got a call. By this point it was nearing the last few weeks of school, and because this guy never said anything bad, and police said there was nothing to do, I just answered the phone and asked what he wanted. I remember, clear as day, he was listing off video games. Red Dead Redemption, Modern Warfare 2, Halo 3, etc. I looked to my disk stand and saw he was reading off the list in order that my games were, top to bottom. I stood up and looked out the window, but nobody was there. After the list was done, I just stood there and he told me something about me having good taste in games, and that we should play sometime. At this moment I was scared shitless. I cried and called my dad. He came home early and we realized, like idiots, that we could just change my number. We changed my number and I purged my Facebook account, and we all set our accounts to private. Maybe 6 months later, we moved and after changing the number, I never got any calls from this guy. The reason I came to tell the story is because I've been getting unknown numbers calling me for the past couple days, and I never answer them anymore, but telling my girlfriend about it, she reminded me about the guy. So I will be changing my number soon as a precaution. Any questions I will answer, because there are a few stories I left out due to length. So 2 nights ago my mom received a phone call from an unrestricted talking about some messed up stuff and called me to come get her, so I'll pretty much lay out everything that happened. At 3:38 a.m. I got a text from my mom asking if I was up still. I replied yes and was curious as to what she was wanting since it was a work night for her and she is always in bed early. My father's a firefighter and it was a night he was on shift, so I knew he wasn't home. Less than a minute after I replied she called me, so I answered it and my mom was very upset, crying actually, and was asking me to come pick her up from home since I live only 2 streets away from her, so it takes me at most 2 minutes to drive to her house. I immediately say yes, throw in my little Bluetooth speaker thing I have and start getting dressed. I grab one of my pistols and proceed out my door. I grabbed my pistol because I was unsure of what was going on. As I'm rushing to get ready I'm asking what's wrong. She tells me that at about 3:28 she got a phone call from a restricted number and answered her phone since it woke her up. Upon answering it she said some guy started talking, who she didn't recognize. She's unclear what he initially started saying when she picked up since she was still out of it from just waking up, but when alert she said the man said that he was babysitting a 9-year-old girl named Ashley on earlier when she was on the couch with him he did stuff to her, basically saying he molested her. Obviously my mom is completely blindsided but what's going on and immediately starts asking who she is speaking to. Asking if this is some kind of sick prank call and says don't call her ever again and hangs up. Immediately the restricted number calls back and tries talking to her again, and again she states this better not be some sick prank and hangs up. So he calls a 3rd time and is saying stuff again, though my mom wasn't too sure what he was saying since at this point she was very uncomfortable and headed to the kitchen to turn on all the house lights and grab one of her knives. Again she hung up. Number calls a 4th time and my mom tells him, listen up, I'm done playing your games, I'm going to call the cops. Who is this? In which she said he angrily replies, no, you listen up, I'm not here to answer your questions. You are here to listen to me. Now, you are going to stay on the line and listen to everything I did to this girl, otherwise I'm going into her room and doing it again. My mom hangs up again and that's when she texts and calls me and stays on the line with her me as I'm quickly getting ready and heading over there. While on the line he calls a 5th time, in which my mom ignores the call but says he left a voicemail this time. While on my way there, which again I live a 2-minute drive away, he calls a 6th and 7th time which my mom ignores, and then that's when I pull up to the side of her home. Also, not sure if this is some weird coincidence or not, but as I'm about 2-3 houses down from hers about to pull up, is when they stopped calling. That being said, I was still around the corner so her home wouldn't have even been inside yet when they stopped. So she jumps in my car and we drive to the police station. I am also a firefighter for my city, so I knew a cop working and knew I'd rather bring all this up to him as opposed to just calling them 911. So we get there and explain everything to him. Mom tells him about the voicemail. She says she does want to listen to it and asks the cop if he can and maybe get a sense of what my mom is talking about in regards to this number calling. So cop listens to it, says it's about 15 seconds long and says, yeah, you probably don't want to listen to that. Anyways, I ask if it's possible to trace a restricted number, since I thought you could, but he said he doesn't think you can, so he goes back and gets his supervising officer to get his input on what could be done. Supervising officer confirms that a restricted call can't be traced and says unfortunately there's not really anything that can be done. He asks my mom if she either recognized the man's voice, knew a little girl named Ashley, or heard the sounds of a little girl basically crying or struggling on the phone calls, and my mom said no. So therefore there really isn't any way, or any reason to get a detective involved. He also suggested that there's probably a strong possibility that this is just some guy fabricating this whole story because that's how this weirdo gets off. Just kind of crazy that out of any random number this dude could call to get off happens to be my mom's. The officer said best case scenario, my mom's cell phone provider most likely could trace the call and see the number and who it belongs to, but assured us that most likely the phone company would absolutely not give us this info unless we had orders from a judge. So basically we just filed our report and I brought my mom home and waited until my dad got off work in the morning. Has anyone ever heard of something like this happening before? Should I try to get a hold of the phone company and see if I can get any info at all? I'm sure it would sort of out my mom at ease if the number is from like a few states over as opposed to a local number. I don't know, it just seems weird to try and brush this whole thing off and hope they never call my mom again. The way I see it is if someone makes a bomb threat to a school, which is usually always just some kid or someone not serious at all, it is always treated as if it is true and becomes a huge ordeal, so why not treat a phone call of a little girl being molested not in the same category? Should I pursue getting info or not? Edit. So it's been 2 days and no calls, which is good. Stopped by my mom's phone provider and briefly explained the situation and was ultimately shot down, saying they could not release any of the caller's information to my parents. Though, my dad is pretty close with some of the officers, so they are trying to work with him, since with a subpoena from a judge, the phone company could release the info.